The October sun painted the golden leaves of the oak trees surrounding the Torino mansion in Newark, New Jersey. The property, with its high walls and discreetly positioned security cameras, looked like a silent fortress in the heart of one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. Within those walls of red brick and Italian marble, Vincent Vinnie Torino walked the corridors with heavy steps, as he had done every morning for exactly 20 years. At 62 years old, Vinnie carried the weight of 2 decades of guilt on the broad shoulders that once supported the most feared empire on the East Coast. His hair, once black as a Newark night, now displayed silver strands that told the story of each day without her. Every wrinkle on his face, bronzed by the New Jersey sun, narrated a battle lost against time and hope. The mansion, which once echoed with laughter and the sound of high heels running up the marble stairs, now breathed only the heavy silence of waiting. The check crystal chandeliers still shone with the same intensity. The Persian rugs still covered the noble wood floors. But everything seemed frozen in time, as if the house itself was in a coma alongside its mistress. Vinnie stopped before the second-floor bedroom door, as he did religiously every morning. His hands, marked by scars that told stories he preferred to forget, trembled slightly as he touched the golden doorknob. On the other side of that door was Isabella, his Bella, the woman who had transformed a street boy from Newark into the most powerful man in the region's underworld. The room was bathed in soft light, filtering through Italian silk curtains. The aroma of jasmine, Isabella's favorite perfume, still permeated the air, renewed daily by a team of nurses who cared for her, with the dedication of those who knew that any negligence could cost much more than their job. Isabella Torino lay in the king-size bed, surrounded by state-of-the-art medical equipment that monitored every beat of her heart, every breath that entered and left her lungs. At 58 years old, she maintained the ethereal beauty that had conquered Vinnie 3 decades ago. Her brown hair, now with silver streaks, was carefully combed, and her skin, though pale, still retained the softness he so loved to caress. "Good morning, my love," murmured Vinnie, sitting in the leather chair that had become his second home. "Today is Tuesday, October 15th. Autumn is beautiful outside, just the way you always liked it." He took her hand in his, feeling the warm but inert skin. The doctors said she could hear, that somewhere inside that brilliant mind that once commanded the family's legitimate businesses, Isabella was still present. Vinnie clung to this possibility like a shipwrecked man clings to a piece of wood in the ocean. "Dr. Martinez said your vital signs are stable," he continued, his hoarse voice carrying the Newark accent he had never been able to completely disguise. "And the new physical therapist, that girl from the Bronx, said your muscles are responding well to the exercises." The door opened softly, and Maria Santos entered pushing a cleaning cart. At 55 years old, Maria was a small but determined woman with calloused hands that told the story of a lifetime of honest work. Her brown eyes, always gentle, carried the wisdom of someone who had raised 3 children alone on Newark's difficult streets. "Good morning, Mr. Torino," she said with the soft accent that mixed the Portuguese of her childhood in Portugal with the English learned on American streets. "May I begin cleaning?" Vinnie nodded without taking his eyes off Isabella. Maria had become more than an employee over the years. She was one of the few people he allowed to enter that sanctuary. There was something about her presence that brought peace to the environment, a serenity he couldn't explain. While Maria worked silently, arranging the fresh flowers that arrived daily and adjusting the curtains so that light fell perfectly on Isabella's face, Vinnie lost himself in memories. He remembered the day he met Isabella at a party in the Ironbound district, the Portuguese heart of Newark. She was a law student at Rutgers, daughter of Italian immigrants who had built a small fortune with a chain of restaurants. Isabella shouldn't have been interested in him. Vinnie was a street kid, son of a dock worker who died young and a mother who cleaned houses to survive. But there was something about him that attracted her, perhaps the fierce determination in his green eyes, or the way he protected the weaker ones in the neighborhood, even when it meant facing men much bigger and more dangerous. "She was always stubborn," murmured Vinny, caressing Isabella's face. "Remember when you insisted on coming with me to that meeting with the Genovesi? You said that if I was going to build an empire, you would be by my side to make sure it was done the right way." Maria stopped cleaning for a moment, observing the devotion on the face of the man the outside world feared. She had worked for many wealthy families over the years, but had never seen a love as deep and lasting as Vinny's for Isabella. The accident had happened on a rainy October night, exactly 20 years ago. Isabella was returning from a meeting of the charitable foundation she managed, an organization that helped immigrant families establish themselves in Newark. A drunk driver had run the red light at the intersection of Broad Street and Market Street, hitting the passenger side of Isabella's Mercedes with enough force to flip the car 3 times. The doctors said it was a miracle she survived. The head trauma was severe, and although there was no apparent damage to other organs, her brain had entered a state of deep protection. Coma, they called it, a word that had become the definition of Vinny's life. "Mr. Torino," said Maria softly, "my son Marcus is graduating in physical therapy from Keene University next month. He has been studying a lot about cases like Mrs. Torino's. Maybe he could help somehow." Vinny looked up, interested. He had known Marcus Santos since the boy was a child, running through the mansion's corridors while Maria worked. The boy had always been different, quiet, observant, with an intelligence that shone in his dark eyes. While other neighborhood boys got into trouble, Marcus spent afternoons at the public library, devouring books about science and medicine. "Is he good?" asked Vinny, his voice carrying a cautious hope he hadn't felt in years. "He's the best in his class," replied Maria with maternal pride. "The professors say he has a gift, a special intuition for understanding how the body works, and he always asks about Mrs. Torino, always wanted to help." Vinny nodded slowly. Over the years, he had brought the world's best specialists to examine Isabella. Neurologists from Johns Hopkins, coma specialists from the Mayo Clinic, even an experimental doctor from Switzerland who had cost a fortune. All came to the same conclusion. Isabella was stable, but the chances of recovery diminished with each passing year. But there was something in the way Maria spoke about her son that awakened a spark of hope in Vinny's chest. Maybe it was desperation talking, or maybe it was the intuition that had kept him alive on Newark's ruthless streets for so many years. "Bring him here," said Vinny finally. "Let him take a look at her. What do we have to lose?" Maria smiled, and for the first time in months, Vinny saw tears of hope in her eyes. She finished cleaning quickly and headed for the door, but stopped before leaving. "Mr. Torino," she said, "Marcus always said he believes Mrs. Torino is just waiting for the right moment to come back. He says he can feel it in her." After Maria left, Vinny was alone with Isabella again. The room was perfectly clean. The fresh flowers exhaled their soft perfume, and the afternoon light created a golden halo around his wife's face. "Did you hear that, Bella?" he whispered, kissing her forehead. "Maybe it's time. Maybe this boy has something that all these expensive doctors don't have." Outside, the autumn leaves danced in the wind blowing from the Passaic River, carrying with it the promise of change. Newark was transforming, as it always had throughout its turbulent history. New buildings emerged on the horizon, young families moved to revitalized neighborhoods, and hope flourished even in the city's darkest corners. In the Torino mansion, the silence of 20 years was about to be broken. Marcus Santos, the cleaning lady's son who grew up running through those house corridors, was just weeks away from graduating, and unknowingly, from forever changing the destiny of one of the East Coast's most powerful families. As the sun set over Newark, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink that reflected in the mansion's windows, Vinny remained beside Isabella, holding her hand and whispering promises of a future that, for the first time in 2 decades, seemed possible. Hope, like a seed planted in fertile soil, began to germinate in the heart of a man who had forgotten how to dream. And somewhere in the city, a young physical therapy student finished another day of studies, not imagining that soon he would be called to accomplish what many would consider impossible. The first chapter of Newark's most extraordinary story was about to begin, and it would all start with a mother's unwavering faith in her son and the despair transformed into hope of a man who loved his wife more than his own life. Marcus Santos adjusted his backpack on his shoulders as he walked through the familiar streets of Newark's North Ward, where he had grown up. The autumn of 2024 painted the city with vibrant colors, and the fresh morning air carried the aroma of coffee and fresh bread from the Portuguese bakeries that dotted the neighborhood. At 23 years old, Marcus was a tall, thin young man with dark eyes that reflected sharp intelligence and hands that seemed born to heal. Keene University was only 20 minutes by car from his house, but Marcus preferred to walk whenever possible. These walking moments gave him time to process everything he was learning, to connect complex theories with the reality he saw around him. Newark was a city of contrasts. Neighborhoods under renovation coexisted with areas still marked by poverty, and Marcus had learned early that healing, whether physical or social, required patience, dedication, and a deep understanding of the roots of problems. That specific morning, he was particularly anxious. His mother had mentioned the night before that Mr. Torino was interested in meeting him, in hearing his ideas about Mrs. Isabella's case. Marcus knew the story. It was impossible to grow up in that house without knowing about the tragedy that had frozen time in the mansion's corridors. For years, while his mother worked, Marcus had discreetly observed the routine that unfolded around Isabella's room. He had seen the country's most renowned doctors enter and leave with somber expressions, witnessed physical therapy sessions that seemed more like rituals of hope than effective treatments, and noticed how Mr. Torino aged a little more each passing day. But Marcus saw something that others seemed to have lost sight of. During his studies at Keene, especially in Dr. Richard Chen's classes, a neurologist who had revolutionized the treatment of patients in vegetative states, Marcus learned that the human brain was much more resilient and adaptable than traditional medicine usually recognized. The brain is not a broken machine waiting to be fixed, Dr. Chen always said during his lectures. It's a living, dynamic organ capable of creating new connections even after decades of dormancy. The key is not just to stimulate what's damaged, but to awaken what's asleep. Marcus had specialized in an approach that combined traditional physical therapy with multidimensional sensory stimulation techniques. His graduation thesis, which he would defend in 2 weeks, explored how the combination of specific tactile, auditory, and olfactory stimuli could reactivate neural pathways that had remained dormant for years. Arriving at the university, Marcus headed directly to the neurorehabilitation laboratory, where he would spend the next 4 hours studying cases similar to Isabella's. The laboratory was his sanctuary, a modern space equipped with cutting-edge technology, where he could experiment and develop his theories without the limitations of traditional clinical practice. "Marcus," called Sarah Chen, Dr. Chen's daughter and his study partner. "You need to see this." Sarah was leaning over a computer, analyzing data from a recent study on patients in prolonged coma. Her eyes shone with the excitement of discovery, and Marcus approached quickly. "Look at these results," she said, pointing to colorful graphs on the screen. A hospital in Boston managed to awaken a patient who had been in a coma for 15 years using a combination of transcranial magnetic stimulation with personalized olfactory memory therapy. Marcus studied the data carefully. The case was remarkably similar to Isabella's. Middle-aged woman, severe head trauma, no response to conventional treatments for more than a decade. But what impressed him most was the approach. Instead of trying to fix the damaged brain, the doctors had focused on awakening deep memories through specific sensory stimuli. They used the perfume she wore before the accident, continued Sarah, combined with music that had emotional meaning for her, and tactile stimuli that replicated familiar sensations. The theory is that these sensory memories are stored in parts of the brain that weren't affected by the trauma. Marcus felt his heart accelerate. It was exactly what he had theorized in his thesis, but seeing concrete results validated his suspicions in a way he hadn't expected. "Sarah," he said, his voice loaded with urgency, "I need to try this. There's a patient. Someone I've known for years. If this approach works, you're talking about Mrs. Torino, aren't you? Asked Sarah with a knowing smile. Your mother works for them, right? Marcus, you know you can't just show up and propose an experimental treatment. You haven't even graduated yet. Marcus knew she was right, but something inside him, an intuition that had guided his studies since the first day, told him he could help Isabella. It wasn't arrogance. It was a deep certainty he couldn't rationally explain. I know, he replied. But what if I'm right? What if she's just waiting for the right stimulus to come back? That afternoon, Marcus returned home with his mind bubbling with possibilities. The house where he grew up was modest but cozy, located on a quiet street in the North Ward. His mother had managed to buy it years ago, thanks to the generous salary Mr. Torino paid and her own determination to give her children a solid foundation. Maria was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Marcus arrived. The aroma of Portuguese sausage and sautéed peppers filled his nostrils, bringing childhood memories and the feeling of security his mother had always managed to create, even in the most difficult moments. "How was university today?" asked Maria, without looking up from the pan. "Mom," said Marcus, sitting at the kitchen table, "tell me more about Mrs. Torino. How was she before the accident?" Maria stopped stirring the sauté and turned to look at her son. There was something in the intensity of his eyes that she recognized. The same determination he had shown when he decided to study medicine, the same passion that led him to choose physical therapy when everyone expected him to follow a more lucrative path. "Why do you want to know?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Because I think I can help her," Marcus replied simply. "Not with the methods other doctors have tried, but with something different. Something that takes into account who she was, not just what happened to her." Maria sat at the table, her calloused hands intertwined in front of her. For a moment she seemed lost in memories, and Marcus waited patiently. "Isabella is an extraordinary woman," Maria began. "When I started working for them 15 years ago, I expected to find a typical mobster's wife, spoiled, distant, maybe even cruel. But she wasn't any of that." Maria told how Isabella had insisted on learning Portuguese to communicate better with her, how she had helped Marcus with homework when he was younger, and how she managed a foundation that had helped hundreds of immigrant families establish themselves in Newark. "She loved jasmine," continued Maria. "There were always fresh flowers throughout the house. And music, she played piano beautifully. Chopin was her favorite, especially the nocturnes. She said music helped her think, find solutions to complex problems." Marcus absorbed every detail, his mind already formulating a plan. Jasmine, Chopin, the texture of fine fabrics she wore, the sound of rain she loved to hear from the covered porch. All these elements could be keys to awakening deep memories. "And Mr. Torino?" asked Marcus. "How was he with her?" Maria's face softened. They loved each other in a way I had never seen before. "He may be a dangerous man to the outside world, but with her he was just Vincent, a man in love with his wife. He still talks to her every day, tells her about the weather, about business, about people who ask about her." That night, Marcus stayed up late, researching and planning. He knew he would have only one chance to convince Mr. Torino to let him try his approach. He needed to be precise, professional, but also demonstrate the passion and conviction he felt. The next morning, Maria arrived at work earlier than usual. She found Vinny in his office, a masculine environment decorated with dark wood and leather, where he conducted the family's legitimate business, a chain of restaurants, some real estate properties, and investments in construction companies. "Mr. Torino," she said, gently knocking on the open door, "Marcus would like to speak with you about Mrs. Isabelli. He has some ideas, different ones." Vinny looked up from the papers he was reviewing. There was something in Maria's voice that caught his attention, a contained urgency, a careful hope he hadn't heard in years. "Different how?" he asked. He believes the traditional approach may be ignoring important aspects of her personality, of the memories that may be intact. He wants to try something that takes into account who she was, not just what happened to her. Vinny leaned back in his chair, studying Maria's face. She had been loyal to the family for 15 years, had cared for Isabella with the dedication of a sister, and had raised a son who, even growing up on the periphery of a dangerous world, had chosen to dedicate his life to healing people. "Bring him here," said Vinny finally. "This afternoon. I want to hear what he has to say." When Maria left the office, Vinny got up and walked to the window overlooking the garden where Isabella used to spend afternoons reading. The roses she had planted still bloomed, cared for by a gardener who followed her original instructions religiously. For the first time in years, Vinny felt something he had almost forgotten how to recognize. Genuine hope, not the desperate hope that had led him to spend fortunes on international specialists, but something more solid, based on the intuition that sometimes answers came from the most unexpected places. That afternoon, Marcus Santos would climb the stairs of the Torino mansion, not as the cleaning lady's son, but as a young professional about to propose something that could change everything. And in her silent room, Isabella continued her long wait, unaware that her salvation could be in the hands of someone who had grown up running through the corridors of her house, someone who had observed her with a child's eyes and now saw her with a healer's knowledge. The second chapter was closing, but the real story was just beginning. Thursday afternoon arrived with a fresh breeze that made the golden leaves dance in the Torino mansion garden. Marcus Santos stopped before the wrought iron gates, breathing deeply to calm the nerves that threatened to betray his confidence. He had spent the previous night reviewing his notes, organizing his arguments, and preparing a presentation that could change not only his life, but potentially awaken Isabella from her 2-decade sleep. Wearing his best dress shirt and carrying a leather briefcase that had been an early graduation gift from his mother, Marcus felt as if he were about to defend his thesis before the most important committee of his life. In a certain sense, that was exactly what was happening. Tony Ricci, Vinny's head of security, opened the gates with a respectful nod. Tony had known Marcus since childhood and had watched his transformation from a curious boy into a determined young man who carried medical books everywhere. "He's waiting for you in the office," said Tony, his deep voice carrying a note of encouragement. "Good luck, kid." Marcus walked through the circular entrance, passing by the marble fountain where he used to play as a child while his mother worked. The mansion seemed different now, not smaller, as usually happens when we revisit childhood places, but more solemn, loaded with the weight of years of deferred hope. Maria met him at the main door, her eyes shining with maternal pride and anxiety. She had bet her reputation and the trust she had built over the years on this moment. "Do you remember everything we talked about?" she whispered, adjusting her son's tie. "I remember, Mom," replied Marcus, his voice firm despite the nerves. "I'll do my best." Vinny Torino's office was exactly as Marcus remembered, but now he saw it with adult eyes. The mahogany shelves filled with books about business and Italian history, the photographs in silver frames showing happy moments with Isabella, and behind the desk, the man who had built an empire but would give everything to have his wife back. Vinny was standing by the window, observing the garden where Isabella used to spend afternoons. When he turned to greet Marcus, the young man was impressed by the transformation. The powerful man he remembered from childhood seemed to have aged decades in a few years. His green eyes, once penetrating and intimidating, now carried a deep sadness that no amount of power or money could cure. "Marcus," said Vinny, extending his hand, "you've grown. Your mother tells me you're graduating in physical therapy." "Yes, sir," replied Marcus, shaking Vinny's firm hand, "and I specialized in neurorehabilitation, focusing on patients with prolonged head trauma." Vinny gestured for Marcus to sit in the leather armchair in front of his desk. For a moment, the two men studied each other, the aged patriarch who had lost everything that really mattered, and the young idealist who believed he could accomplish the impossible. "Your mother said you have ideas about Isabella," began Vinny, his voice carefully controlled. "Ideas different from the doctors I've already consulted." Marcus opened his briefcase and removed a series of meticulously organized documents. He had prepared this presentation as if his life depended on it, because, in a way, it did. "Mr. Torino," began Marcus, "in the last 20 years, medicine has made extraordinary advances in understanding the human brain. We've discovered that it's much more plastic and resilient than we imagined. patients who were given up as lost causes have awakened from prolonged comas when exposed to the correct stimuli. Vinny leaned forward, interested despite himself. He had heard similar promises from dozens of specialists over the years, but there was something in the way Marcus spoke, a combination of scientific knowledge and personal intuition, that was different. Marcus showed case studies, brain activity graphs, and photographs of state-of-the-art equipment. But then he did something none of the other doctors had done. He began to talk about Isabella as a person, not as a patient. What most treatments ignore, explained Marcus, is that Mrs. Torino is not just a damaged brain. She's a woman who loved Jasmine, who played Chopin, who dedicated her life to helping others. These memories, these deep emotional connections, may be intact in parts of the brain that weren't affected by the trauma. Vinny felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he couldn't immediately identify. It was as if Marcus were talking about the Isabella he knew and loved, not about the silent patient she had become. "Continue," said Vinny, his voice softer. Marcus explained his theory about personalized multi-dimensional sensory stimulation. Instead of trying to repair neurological damage directly, the approach would focus on awakening deep memories through stimuli that had specific emotional meaning for Isabella. "For example," said Marcus, removing a small bottle from his briefcase, "this is jasmine essential oil, the same variety your mother told me Mrs. Torino adored. Combined with music she used to play, textures she appreciated, and even the voices of people she loved, these stimuli could create a bridge to her consciousness." Vinny took the bottle and opened it carefully. The familiar aroma filled the office, and for a moment he was transported back to mornings when he woke up with Isabella already up, tending to her flowers in the garden, the scent of jasmine permeating her hair. "Do you really believe this can work?" asked Vinny, his voice loaded with a vulnerability he rarely showed. Marcus looked directly into Vinny's eyes, and in that moment all the difference in age, social status, and power disappeared. They were just two men united by love for Isabella, one as a husband, the other as someone who had grown up admiring her kindness. "Mr. Torino," said Marcos, "I can't promise results, but I can promise that I'll try with everything I've learned, with all the dedication I have. Mrs. Torino helped me with homework when I was a child, encouraged me to study, showed me it was possible to dream big even coming from where I come from. I owe this to her." Vinny got up and walked again to the window. Outside, the gardener was pruning Isabella's roses, following the instructions she had left years ago. Life continued, seasons changed, but inside that house, time had stopped. "What kind of equipment would you need?" asked Vinny finally. Marcus felt his heart accelerate. It was the first time Vinny spoke in practical terms, not just theoretical. "Some basic neurological monitoring equipment which you already have," replied Marcus, "and access to Mrs. Torino's personal things, photographs, music, objects that had meaning for her. The most important thing is to create an environment that awakens specific memories." "And how long would it take?" asked Vinny. "That's impossible to predict," admitted Marcus. "It could be days, weeks, months, or it might not work. But Mr. Torino, if there's a chance, even small, that she could come back." Vinny turned, and Marcus saw tears in the eyes of Newark's most powerful man. They were tears of hope, of fear, of love that had been tested by 2 decades of silence. "When can you start?" asked Vinny. "Immediately," replied Marcus. "I graduate next week, but I can start preparations now. I need to study more about Mrs. Torino's personal history, understand her preferences, her most precious memories." Vinny returned to his desk and opened a drawer. From inside, he removed a golden key. "This is the key to her room," he said, extending it to Marcus. "There's a chest in the closet with letters, photographs, musical scores, everything she considered important. Use whatever you need." Marcus took the key with trembling hands. It was more than a piece of metal. It was the trust of a desperate man, the hope of a family, and perhaps the key to awakening an extraordinary woman from her prolonged sleep. "Mr. Torino," said Marcos, carefully storing the key in his pocket, "I won't disappoint you." "I know you won't," replied Vinny. "And Marcus, thank you for trying." for caring, for seeing more in her than just a patient. When Marcus left the office, Maria was waiting in the corridor, anxious. One look at her son's face was enough for her to understand that something had fundamentally changed. "He said yes," she whispered. "He said yes," confirmed Marcus, showing the golden key. "Mom, I'm going to need your help. You know Mrs. Torino better than any doctor. Her memories, her preferences, the details that made her who she was." Maria hugged her son, feeling a mixture of pride and concern. She had raised a young man brave enough to try the impossible, but she also knew that failure could destroy him. "We're going to bring her back," said Marcus, his voice loaded with determination. "I feel it, Mom. She's there, waiting. We just need to find the right key." That night, while Newark prepared to sleep, Marcus Santos sat in his room with neurology books scattered around him and the golden key shining under the desk light. He was about to embark on the most important journey of his life, a journey that would test not only his medical knowledge, but his faith in the human capacity to overcome the impossible. In the silent room of the Torino mansion, Isabella continued her long wait, unaware that her salvation was being planned by someone who had grown up running through the corridors of her house, someone who now returned as a healer determined to awaken not just her body, but her soul. The third chapter was coming to an end, but the real battle was about to begin. Monday morning brought with it a different energy to the Torino mansion. Marcus Santos arrived at 7 in the morning, carrying 2 suitcases of equipment borrowed from the university, and a determination that radiated from every pore of his being. He had spent the weekend immersed in Isabella's memory chest, discovering layers of a complex and fascinating personality that medical reports could never capture. Vinny met him at the entrance, wearing a silk robe over his pajamas. The patriarch had slept little in recent nights, alternating between hope and fear of another disappointment. But there was something in Marcus's confident posture that reassured him. "Good morning, Mr. Torino," said Marcus, adjusting the suitcases. "I'm ready to begin." "The room is prepared," replied Vinny, his voice hoarse from interrupted sleep. "I removed some of the more intrusive medical equipment as you requested. The essential monitors remain." Marcus nodded, grateful. Part of his theory was that the excessive clinical environment could be unconsciously signaling to Isabella's brain that she was sick instead of simply resting. He wanted to create a space that felt more like a beloved woman's room than an intensive care unit. Going up the familiar stairs, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. In the corridor, he met Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the neurologist who had been following Isabella for 5 years. She was a 50-year-old woman with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that had seen many miracles and even more disappointments. "So you're the young man who's going to try to awaken our sleeping beauty," she said, unable to hide a slightly skeptical tone. "I hope you understand we've tried sensory stimulation before." "I understand, Dr. Hernandez," replied Marcus respectfully. "But I believe the difference lies in the specific personalization of the stimuli. Not just generic sounds or smells, but elements that have deep emotional meaning for Mrs. Torino specifically." The doctor studied the young man for a moment, noting the seriousness in his eyes and the way he spoke about Isabella with genuine reverence. "Very well," she said finally, "but I want to monitor everything. Any change in vital signs, any indication of stress, and we stop immediately." Marcus agreed, grateful to have experienced medical supervision. He was confident in his theory, but humble enough to recognize he was still learning. Isabella's room had been subtly transformed. The heavy curtains were replaced with lighter fabrics that allowed natural light to enter. Marcus had positioned small vases with fresh jasmine at strategic points, and a discrete sound system was ready to reproduce the Chopin compositions he had found among Isabella's personal scores. "Hello, Mrs. Torino," said Marcus softly, approaching the bed. "I'm Marcus Santos. You've known me since childhood, but now I'm here as a physical therapist. I'm going to try to help you find your way back to us." He began with the protocol he had developed, based on his research and the memories Maria had shared. First, he applied jasmine oil to his own hands and began a gentle massage on Isabella's arms, explaining each movement. "This is jasmine from your garden," he said, his voice calm and comforting, Your mother told me how you loved caring for the flowers, how you woke up early to water them before the sun got too strong. While massaging, Marcus observed Isabella's face attentively, looking for any sign of response. His studies had shown that even patients in deep coma could process sensory information at subconscious levels. After 15 minutes of aromatic massage, he activated the sound system. The first chords of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the room, the melody flowing like water over stones. Marcus had chosen this specific piece because he had found the score in Isabella's chest with annotations in her own handwriting indicating it was one of her favorites. "You used to play this on the living room piano," murmured Marcus, continuing the massage. "Mr. Torino told me he loved hearing you play after dinner, that it was the most peaceful moment of his day." Doctor. Hernandez watched the monitors attentively. After 20 minutes, she noticed a slight change in Isabella's brain wave patterns. It wasn't dramatic, but it was definitely different from the constant pattern she had observed for years. "Marcus," she said softly, "keep doing exactly what you're doing." Encouraged, Marcus proceeded to the next phase of his protocol. He had brought a selection of fabrics he had found in Isabella's closet: Italian silk, soft cashmere, fine linen. He began to pass these fabrics gently over her hands and arms, describing each texture. "This is silk from the dress you wore to the Benedetti wedding," he said, remembering a photograph he had seen. "You were beautiful that day, smiling beside Mr. Torino." He still keeps the photo on his office desk. While working, Marcus began to tell stories he had collected from Maria, Vinny, and even Tony Ricci. Stories about Isabella's charitable foundation, about how she had helped immigrant families, about her passion for Italian literature, and her collection of first editions. "You saved the Rossi family from deportation," told Marcus, his voice loaded with admiration. "Maria told me you spent weeks studying immigration law, that you hired the best lawyers and didn't rest until they could stay. Their children are now doctors thanks to you." For 3 hours, Marcus maintained the protocol, alternating between aromatic massage, musical and tactile stimulation, and personal narratives. Dr. Hernandez continued observing the monitors, noting subtle but consistent changes in Isabella's brain activity. At 11 in the morning, Vinny entered the room silently. He had tried to work in his office, but anxiety consumed him. Seeing Marcus working with such dedication, talking to Isabella as if she could hear him, Vinny felt an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. "How is she?" he whispered to Dr. Hernandez. "There's activity," replied the doctor, keeping her voice low. "Subtle but definitely present. Her brain is responding to the stimuli in a way I haven't seen in years." Marcus noticed Vinny's presence and signaled for him to approach. "Mr. Torino," said Marcus, "I'd like you to talk to her. Tell her about the day, about the plans you had, about how you feel. Your voice may be the most powerful stimulus of all." Vinny approached the bed hesitantly, taking Isabella's hand, as he had done every morning for 20 years. But this time was different. There was hope in the air, a feeling that she really could be listening. "Hi, my love," began Vinny, his voice trembling. "Today is Monday, and it's a beautiful day outside. The roses you planted are blooming again. And we have a special visitor, Marcus, Maria's son. Do you remember him? He grew up and became an extraordinary man, just like you always said he would." Marcus continued his massage while Vinny spoke, creating a symphony of sensory and emotional stimuli. Chopin's music continued playing softly. The scent of jasmine hung in the air, and the voices of 2 people who loved Isabella filled the room with memories and hope. At 2 in the afternoon, something changed. Dr. Hernandez was observing the monitors when she noticed a sudden spike in Isabella's brain activity. It wasn't just a fluctuation. It was a pattern she hadn't seen in decades of medical practice. "Marcus," she said, her voice loaded with controlled urgency, "stop what you're doing and observe." Marcus interrupted the massage and looked at Isabella. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, he saw something that made his heart stop. A solitary tear rolled down Isabella's face. "My God," whispered Vinny, squeezing his wife's hand. "Bella, can you hear me?" The tear was followed by another. And then Marcus noticed something even more extraordinary. Isabella's fingers contracted slightly around Vinny's hand. It was a subtle movement, almost imperceptible, but definitely intentional. Dr. Hernandez quickly checked the monitors, confirming it wasn't just a reflex reaction. Isabella's brain activity was showing patterns consistent with emerging consciousness. "She's coming back," said Marcus, his voice loaded with emotion. "Mrs. Torino, if you can hear me, squeeze your husband's hand again." For a moment that seemed like an eternity, nothing happened. Then clearly and unmistakably, Isabella squeezed Vinny's hand. Vinny began to cry, 20 years of pain and hope pouring out in tears of joy. Marcus felt his own tears streaming down his face, but maintained focus, continuing the sensory stimulation that had triggered this miraculous response. "Keep talking to her," instructed Marcus. "Maintain the connection." "Bella, my love," said Vinny, his voice broken by emotion. "I knew you would come back to me. I never stopped believing. I never stopped loving you." Isabella's fingers moved again, this time more deliberately. Dr. Hernandez was documenting everything, knowing she was witnessing something that would change not only the Torino family's life, but potentially the medical approach to similar cases. Marcus continued the protocol for 2 more hours, maintaining sensory stimulation, while Vinny talked to Isabella about shared memories, about future plans, about the love that had sustained both through 2 decades of separation. When the day came to an end, Isabella still hadn't opened her eyes or spoken, but the motor responses were consistent and the brain patterns showed activity that hadn't been seen in 20 years. It was the beginning of an awakening that everyone had begun to believe would never happen. "Tomorrow we continue," said Marcus, exhausted but exultant. "Each day will be a step closer to bringing her completely back." Vinny looked at the young man who had accomplished in 1 day what dozens of specialists couldn't in 2 decades. "Marcus," he said, his voice loaded with gratitude, "you gave us back hope. You gave us back our Bella." As the sun set over Newark, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, the Torino mansion breathed with an energy it hadn't felt in 20 years. Isabella was coming back, and with her, life was returning to a family that had learned to live with a broken heart. The 4th chapter was coming to an end, but the real journey back to life was just beginning. 3 weeks had passed since that first tear, and the Torino mansion had transformed into a center of carefully orchestrated activity. Marcus Santos, now officially graduated in physical therapy, had temporarily moved to the guest room, dedicating every waking moment to the process of awakening Isabella. What had begun as an academic theory had become the most important mission of his life. The morning of November 15th brought with it the first truly dramatic sign of progress. Marcus was performing his morning routine of sensory stimulation when Isabella did something no one expected. She opened her eyes. It wasn't a sudden awakening like in movies. Her eyelids trembled first, as if she were fighting against a deep sleep. Marcus immediately stopped what he was doing and called softly, "Mrs. Torino, Isabella, can you hear me?" Isabella's brown eyes, still cloudy from the confusion of 2 decades of unconsciousness, slowly focused on Marcus's face. For a moment, she seemed not to recognize him, but then something changed in her expression, a spark of recognition, as if she were trying to connect the man in front of her with memories of a boy who used to run through the corridors of her house. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice hoarse and fragile after years of silence. "You grew up." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face, but kept his voice firm and comforting. "Yes, Mrs. Torino, I grew up. And now I'm here to help you come back completely." "Vincent," murmured Isabella, her eyes searching around the room. "Where is Vincent?" "He's coming," said Marcus, already dialing Vinny's number on his cell phone. "He never left your side, not for a day." Vinny came running, still in pajamas, having abandoned an important meeting the moment he received Marcus's call. When he entered the room and saw Isabella awake, looking directly at him, Newark's most powerful man transformed again into the young man in love who had married her 30 years ago. "Bella," he whispered, approaching the bed with reverence, as if she were made of crystal and could break at any moment. "My love, you came back." Isabella tried to smile, although her facial muscles were still weak after so much time. I dreamed about you," she said, her voice gradually gaining strength. "Every day. I could hear your voice, feel you holding my hand." Vinny sat carefully on the edge of the bed, taking Isabella's hands in his. "I talked to you every day for 20 years, he said, his voice broken by emotion. "I told you about the weather, about business, about how much I missed you." Dr. Hernandez arrived minutes later, bringing with her a team of specialists she had summoned to document what was becoming one of the most extraordinary recovery cases in modern medicine. She conducted a series of basic neurological tests, impressed by the mental clarity Isabella demonstrated, considering the time she had spent unconscious. "Your long-term memory seems intact," explained Dr. Hernandez to Vinny and Marcos. "She remembers events from before the accident with remarkable clarity. Short-term memory may take some time to normalize completely, and motor coordination will need intensive physical therapy, but neurologically, she's extraordinarily well." In the following hours, Isabella was gradually reintroduced to the world she had left behind. Marcus and Maria worked together to update Isabella on important events of the last 20 years, starting with family changes and gradually expanding to world events. "Marcus became a physical therapist," told Maria, her eyes shining with pride. "He studied specifically to help people like you. He was the one who found the key to bring you back." Isabella looked at Marcus with an expression of deep gratitude. "You were always special," she said, her voice getting stronger each hour. "Even as a child, I saw something in you, a kindness, a determination." "You inspired me," replied Marcus. "When I was little, you helped me with homework, encouraged me to study. You showed me it was possible to dream big." Over the following days, Isabella's recovery continued to surprise everyone involved. Her physical strength returned gradually through intensive physical therapy sessions with Marcus, while her sharp mind quickly adapted to the changes that had occurred during her absence. News of Isabella's awakening spread quickly through Newark's networks. Families who had been helped by her charitable foundation came to pay homage. Old friends, many of whom had assumed they would never see her awake again, made pilgrimages to the Torino mansion. But perhaps the most significant visit was from Sarah Chen, Marcus's study partner, who brought with her a team of researchers from Keene University, interested in documenting and studying the protocol Marcus had developed. "What you accomplished here," said Dr. Richard Chen, Sarah's father and Marcus's professor, "will change how we treat patients in prolonged coma. You proved that extreme personalization of stimuli, based on the patient's specific emotional history, can be more effective than any advanced medical technology." Marcus, now recognized as a pioneer in his field, remained humble. "I just listened," he said. "I listened to the stories about who Mrs. Torino was, and tried to use that information to find her where she was." A week after the initial awakening, Isabella was strong enough to leave the bed for short periods. Vinny took her to the garden where she had spent so many mornings caring for her flowers. The roses she had planted decades ago still bloomed, religiously cared for by the gardener who had followed her original instructions all these years. "They're beautiful," said Isabella, gently touching a red rose. "You took good care of them." "I took care of everything as you left it," replied Vinny. "The house, the garden, the business, everything waiting for you to come back." Isabella turned to look at the mansion where she had been so happy, where she had built a life with the man she loved. "And the foundation?" she asked. "The families we were helping?" Vinny smiled, knowing this question would come. Even after 20 years unconscious, Isabella's first concern was for others. "Tony took over the administration," he explained. "We continued helping families exactly as you wanted. Actually, we helped more than 500 families over the years." Tears of joy streamed down Isabella's face. "I knew you would do the right thing," she said. "You always do." 2 months after the awakening, Isabella had recovered enough strength to participate in a press conference that Vinny organized to officially tell the story of the miracle. The mansion's living room was transformed into a small auditorium with journalists from Newark, New York, and even national correspondents present. Isabella, wearing an elegant navy blue dress that highlighted her eyes, sat beside Vinny, with Marcus and Dr. Hernandez completing the panel. Her posture was erect, her voice clear and strong, showing few signs of the 20 years she had spent unconscious. "I would like to begin by thanking all the people who never gave up on me," said Isabella, her voice loaded with emotion. "My husband Vincent, who talked to me every day for 2 decades, Maria Santos, who cared for me as if I were her own sister, and especially Marcos Santos, who saw possibilities where others saw only limitations." An NBC journalist raised his hand. "Mrs. Torino, do you remember anything from the years you were unconscious?" Isabella reflected for a moment before responding. "It's hard to explain," she said. "They weren't memories in the traditional sense, but there was awareness. I could hear familiar voices, feel presences. It was like being in a dark room, knowing there were people outside, but not being able to find the door." "And what brought you back?" asked a Star Ledger reporter. Isabella looked at Marcus with a warm smile. "Love," she said simply. "Love combined with scientific knowledge and a deep understanding of who I was as a person." Marcus didn't try to just awaken my brain. He tried to awaken my soul. Marcus was questioned about his methods and future plans. He explained how he had developed the protocol based on extreme personalization of sensory stimuli, and announced he was establishing a clinic specialized in similar cases. "What we learned from Mrs. Torino," said Marcus, "is that each coma patient is unique. They're not just unconscious bodies. They're people with stories, preferences, memories that can be the keys to their recovery." That night, after the journalists left, the family gathered for an intimate dinner. Isabella had insisted on cooking, preparing her famous osso buco with risotto, a recipe she had learned from her Italian grandmother. "I dreamed about this recipe so many times," she said, stirring the risotto with movements that gradually recovered their natural fluidity. "It was one of the most vivid memories I had." Vinny watched his wife cook with an expression of pure happiness. "I never thought I'd see you in this kitchen again," he said, hugging her from behind. "Neither did I," admitted Isabella, leaning against him. "But here we are." During dinner, Isabella made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I want to expand the foundation," she said. "I want to create a specific program for families of patients in prolonged coma. They need support, hope, resources." "Bella," said Vinny gently, "you just woke up. Maybe we should go slowly." "Vincent," replied Isabella with a determined smile that Marcus remembered from his childhood. "I lost 20 years. I don't have time to go slowly." Marcus offered to help with the medical aspect of the program, and Maria suggested they could start by offering support groups for families in the situation they had lived through. "We know what it's like," said Maria. "The hope, the fear, the emotional exhaustion. We can help others get through it." 3 months after the awakening, Isabella was strong enough to visit Keene University, where Marcus had studied. Dr. Chen had organized a special lecture where Isabella and Marcus would tell their story to medical and physical therapy students. The auditorium was packed with students, professors, and medical professionals from throughout the region present. Isabella, now completely recovered in terms of speech and coordination, walked to the podium with confidence. "You are studying to heal people," she began. "But I want you to remember that each patient you treat is more than a diagnosis. We are people with stories, with loves, with dreams, and sometimes those stories can be the key to our healing." She told about her awakening experience, about how Marcus's specific stimuli had created bridges to her consciousness. "He didn't try to fix me," she explained. "He tried to find me." Marcus then presented the scientific data behind his protocol, showing how the personalized approach had resulted in activation of brain areas that had remained dormant for decades. "The future of medicine," he said, "lies not just in more advanced technology, but in deeper understanding of our patients' humanity." After the lecture, a young physical therapy student approached Marcus. "Dr. Santos," she said, "my grandmother has been in a coma for 5 years. The doctors say there's no hope. Do you think your method could help her?" Marcus looked at Isabella, who nodded encouragingly. "Bring me her story," he said. "Tell me about who she was, what she loved, how she lived. Let's see what we can do." 6 months after the awakening, Isabella and Vinny renewed their wedding vows in an intimate ceremony in the mansion garden. The roses were in full bloom, creating a perfect setting for the celebration of a love that had survived 2 decades of separation. Marcus served as best man and Maria as maid of honor. Tony Ricci, who had become more than an employee over the years, conducted the ceremony as a minister ordained online specifically for the occasion. "You are our family," said Isabella during the ceremony, looking at Marcus and Maria. "You brought us back to each other." The vow words were simple but profound. Vinny promised to love Isabella in consciousness and unconsciousness, in sickness and health, for all eternity. Isabella promised to never leave him alone again, no matter where life takes us. When they kissed, sealing their renewed vows, there wasn't a dry eye among those present. It was more than a wedding. It was the celebration of a miracle, of the power of true love and human determination. The party continued until late hours, with Isabella playing piano for the first time in 20 years. Her fingers, though still a bit stiff, found the keys with preserved muscle memory. She played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the same piece Marcus had used to awaken her. "This music brought me back," she said, looking at Marcus. "Every time I hear it, I remember the moment I began to come home." That night, as guests departed and the mansion returned to silence, Isabella and Vinny walked through the garden under moonlight. It was the first time in 20 years they had done this together. "Are you afraid?" asked Vinny. "That this is a dream?" Isabella stopped and turned to him, placing her hands on his face. "If it's a dream," she said, "then it's the most beautiful dream I've ever had. And if it's real, then we're the luckiest people in the world." "It's real," said Vinny, kissing her forehead. "You're real. We're real." As they returned home, Isabella looked at the illuminated windows of the mansion, her house, her home, the place where she had built a life with the man she loved. 20 years had passed, but the love that united them was stronger than ever. "Thank you," she whispered to the universe, to destiny, to all the forces that had conspired to bring her back. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." The autumn of 2029 painted Newark with the same golden colors that had witnessed the miracle 5 years before. The Santos Neuro Rehabilitation Clinic, located in a modern building in the city center, had become a beacon of hope for families across the country facing situations similar to what the Torino family had lived through. Marcus Santos, now 28 years old and internationally recognized as a pioneer in personalized coma awakening techniques, walked through the corridors of his clinic with the same determination he had demonstrated that first morning at the Torino mansion. His revolutionary approach had helped more than 200 patients awaken from prolonged comas, each case a victory against the impossible. Dr. Santos called his assistant. "Mrs. Torino has arrived for the board meeting." Marcus smiled. Isabella had become not just a recovered patient, but an active partner in the clinic. The Isabella Torino Foundation for Coma Research had funded innovative studies and provided support to families facing similar journeys. In the conference room, Isabella presided over a meeting of the foundation's board of directors. At 63 years old, she radiated a vitality that defied the 20 years she had lost. Her hair, now completely silver, was elegantly styled, and her eyes shone with the same intelligence and compassion Marcus remembered from his childhood. The family support program served more than 1,000 families this year, she reported to the board members. And our partnership with universities resulted in 15 new treatment protocols based on the Santos method. Vinny, now 67 years old, watched his wife with the same admiring love as always. He had gradually transferred management of his legitimate businesses to trusted managers, preferring to dedicate his time to supporting Isabella's work and enjoying every moment of their second chance together. After the meeting, Isabella, Vinny, and Marcus headed to the Torino mansion for the weekly dinner that had become tradition. Maria, now 60 years old and officially retired, still insisted on cooking for these special occasions. "How is the new patient?" asked Isabella as they walked through the garden before dinner. "The 16-year-old girl?" Marcus sighed. "Difficult. She's been in a coma for 3 years after a car accident. The parents are desperate, but also realistic about the chances." "And what did you discover about her?" asked Isabella, applying the same investigative approach she had learned to value. "She was a ballerina," replied Marcus. "She danced since she was 5 years old. The parents brought videos, music, even the pointe shoes she used." Isabella stopped walking, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "Have you tried stimulation through movement? Not just music and aromas, but replicating the physical sensations of dance?" Marcus considered the suggestion. It was a logical extension of his protocol, but one he hadn't fully explored yet. "You mean, move her body as if she were dancing?" "Exactly," said Isabella. "If dance was central to her identity, maybe her body has muscle memories that can be awakened." It was the kind of insight that had made Isabella such a valuable partner. Her unique experience as someone who had returned from a prolonged coma, combined with her natural intelligence, frequently led to treatment breakthroughs. During dinner, the conversation turned to future plans. Marcus had been invited to present his discoveries at an international neurology congress in Zurich, and Isabella was writing a book about her experience. "I want people to understand," explained Isabella, "that coma isn't necessarily an end. It can be a pause, a waiting place. And with love, science, and determination, it's possible to find the way back." "And you, Mr. Torino?" asked Marcus. "Any regrets about how things have changed?" Vinny looked at Isabella, who was animatedly discussing plans for a new research center with Maria. "Regrets?" he repeated. "Marcus, I got my wife back. I see her every day making a difference in other people's lives. How could I have regrets?" After dinner, while Isabella and Maria planned the menu for a foundation benefit gala, Vinny and Marcus went out to the porch. The night was clear, and Newark's lights twinkled in the distance. "You know," said Vinny, "sometimes I wonder what would have happened if your mother hadn't suggested you try to help Isabella." Marcus reflected on the question. "I probably would be working in some conventional clinic, treating routine cases. I would never have discovered my true passion. And Isabella would still be sleeping," added Vinny softly. "Maybe," said Marcus. "Or maybe someone else would have found the key. I like to think the universe has a way of putting the right people in the right places at the right time." Vinny nodded. "You brought my wife back to me, Marcus. There's no way I can ever repay that." "Mr. Torino," said Marcus, "you and Mrs. Torino gave me a family when I was a child. You showed me it was possible to dream big. I just returned the favor." At that moment, Isabella appeared on the porch, carrying a tray with coffee and the famous tiramisu that had become her specialty since awakening. "What are you talking about so seriously?" she asked, serving the coffee. "About how lucky we are," replied Vinny, pulling her to sit beside him. Isabella smiled, looking at the two people who had made her second chance at life possible. "Lucky," she agreed, "and grateful, always grateful." As the night progressed and Newark's lights gradually went out, the three remained on the porch, sharing stories and plans for the future. It was a scene no one could have imagined 5 years before. The Mafia boss's wife, who had awakened from a 20-year coma, her devoted husband, and the cleaning lady's son, who had become a renowned doctor, united by an experience that had changed all their lives. The story that had begun with tragedy and despair had transformed into something much greater, a testament to the power of love, science, and human determination. And while Newark slept around them, they knew their story would continue inspiring others to never give up, to always believe that miracles are possible when we combine knowledge with compassion and science with love. Marcus Santos had proven that sometimes the impossible is just a matter of finding the right approach, of seeing the person behind the patient, and of never ever giving up hope.